planning for your podcast is going to help it be more successful.
Listeners are becoming more discerning and a little bit more fussy, so it has to adapt to that. And I think it's probably still the key to what people like about the podcast and why I don't get bored of it. It starts with a sense of curiosity. I genuinely have questions, and it helps. So I have deep empathy for my audience because I understand what they're going through because I'm going through the same shit that they are. And then finding the people who I think could give some value.
Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I started my first podcast just as a hobby in 2019, just for some fun about life here in Vietnam. It's called a Vietnam podcast. And I just became addicted to making podcasts. Then during the pandemic, I actually lost my job and so decided full time going to make podcasting my career and started 7 Million Bikes podcasts. Since then, we've now worked with over 50 podcasts, helped produce over 700 podcast episodes, and helped many of them get to the top of the Apple podcast charts. Now, in today's episode, I'm really excited to talk to somebody that actually works with 7 Million Bikes podcast. And we've been working with them to help produce their podcast for, I think, over a year now. And we're going to be talking about the power of podcast planning because planning for your podcast is going to help it be more successful. Now, my guest today, they started their podcast called The Vet Vault in 2019 to help vets fall back in love with the vet profession. Then in 2021, they added their clinical podcast where the host uses his vast ignorance to ask all of the dumb questions that we all have to a bunch of very smart people. The Vet Vault podcast has now helped over 30,000, and this word is going to be difficult for me because I'm Scottish, veterinary professionals. I did it all
You
right
got
there.
it. Nailed
Veterinary.
it.
Any word with an R in the middle is tough for me. I was worried about that one. Veterinary. But he's helped over 30,000 veterinary professionals worldwide and helped them learn better ways to make the veterinary professional work for them. And he has even monetized his podcast and made it part of his business. Today, we are going to be talking about the power of podcast planning before you hit record and how strategy before you get started can help you reach your audience and your goals. So I am really excited to talk to the amazing host of the Vet Vault podcast, Hubert Hiemstra. Thank you for coming on Smarter Podcasting today.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil. You should try spelling veterinary at 20 times a day. It's a bad career. It's a bad move to pick a career where spelling your job is a challenge.
I just any word with R in the middle, I'm just like wince. I'm like, oh no, how am I going to say this? As you would know, I don't know how that is in South Africa, but in Scotland, murder, burger, purple burglar alarm is they're all my Achilles heel. But congratulations on the success of your podcast. One of the things I love about working with people like yourself is learning so much about so many different topics. I remember a while ago, somebody said to me, "Do you not get bored listening to all these podcasts? It's so many different things." I mean, we've done knitting, accounting, beers, which I love beer. Who doesn't love beer? But we've done so many different things. And I was like, no, I absolutely love it because we get to know so much about it. But tell me more about the Vet Vault podcast.
Mm. I love what you said there about your own story, your own podcasting story, how it started as a little side thing, just a little hobby, and then it sucked you in and became the thing. That's pretty much me. Pretty much me, mate. I am still a practicing veterinarian, but was a full time veterinarian around about 2017, 2018, and owned my own emergency vet hospital practice and structured it so that I had a bit of free time to do other stuff. I always felt vet is such a scientific career, and there's always been a little bit of a creative side to my personality that vet didn't feed. So I created some space to do something else. And I thought I was going to write a book uh, to help younger veterinarians get through those first 5, 10 years that are really challenging. I won't get into the details of that because I'd sort of found my niche in the profession. Found it really tough the first decade or so of my career and then found my own tricks. And I thought, well, what if I speak to other veterinarians who are 10, 20 years out and have found ways to make it work for them to build a sustainable career? I want to speak to them and then make a book, write a book. And then I found that when you send, and everybody is really keen. I spoke to a bunch of vets who I respected and said, are you keen to help with this project? And they went, yes, I'd love to. So I sent an email questionnaire out and had about 0 replies. And then I would call them and chat to them, and then they would happily chat to me for an hour or 2 hours. And then we went actually, the guy that I started the podcast with, who's no longer part of it, but Dr. Gerardo Polly, he was the one who said, "Well, if we're gonna talk to people, why don't we record it and make a podcast?" I was like, "Oh, shit, yeah," because I was by that stage, I was already a mad podcast addict myself, and I had that thought before. So that's how it started. It became really a Trojan horse to get people to speak to us for the book that I was gonna write. And then after about 6 months, I went, "I love podcasting. There's not gonna be a book. This is it. This is the thing." And then exactly like you, found ways to make it my career because I enjoyed it that much.
Well, this might add a whole lot of extra work to your day, but I have a suggestion for you. You can reverse engineer it and you could turn the podcast into a book.
I can, I know, and I should, and I probably will. The problem is I've done so many podcasts that I wouldn't know what exactly to write them. I could write 10 books really from what I've learned from the podcast.
You need to just get the transcript from every episode and then just put it all into one book, something like that. That would be the easiest, but it's still going to take a lot of time. And I don't know if you have this as well. I hate when people give me suggestions of what I should do when all it is going to cost me time, which then it's going to cost me money. Do you get this? People are, you know what you should do? You should do this. And I'm like, no, why don't you do it for me? Like you're just asking me to do something.
Increasingly, yes, increasingly so. You're
Yeah.
dead right. Well
And then I
intentioned,
was
and you just, and I know what the time is. Yeah, how much time it takes, which makes me go, "Great idea, but not gonna happen. Not with
no,
me, and not in this lifetime."
I was just about to say, because I want to make clear, yeah, well intentioned. It's often my wife. She's like, you know what you should do? You should do this, and I'll be like, yep. When am I going to do
Yes.
that? Like that, and it seems so simple as well. Whatever the idea is, and it will be a relatively simple idea, but you realize that there's 10 of those, and you can only pick the ones that you have to do. So this is why you have to plan. So let's talk about planning for your podcast before you even started. How did you start to plan for your podcast once you decided, okay, we're not gonna do the book. We're talking to people. Let's make it a podcast.
Wow, it's evolved so much, and it's still evolving, as you learn, and also as I suppose, as the audience changes. I think listeners are becoming more discerning and a little bit more fussy, so it has to adapt to that. But way back when, it was just, and I think it's probably still the key to what people like about the podcast and why I don't get bored of it. It starts with a sense of curiosity. I genuinely have questions, and it helps that I'm in the profession, so I have deep empathy for my audience because I understand what they're going through because I'm going through the same shit that they are. So it started just with questions, and then finding the people who I wanted to, who I think could give some value. But back in the day, it was really just find, and I don't think that was necessarily the right strategy. Find somebody who I thought was a high profile guest, or somebody with a bit of pull, or somebody with some credibility in the field, and then just speak to them. And I think that's why I want to talk about planning now, because back in the day it was less planned. I wanted to have the whole conversation about everything to that guest from A to B and just sort of see where it goes. It was very much free form, which sometimes gives great results. But as the podcast has grown and as I develop and getting feedback from listeners, I do try to be much more strategic in saying, I have a topic, and I want to answer maybe 2 or 3 questions max, but 1 or 2 is probably better, and then go and find. I literally did my planning session yesterday for the morning, sat down and said, "Okay, what are the topics that I wanna talk about, that I wanna talk about, and what people tell me they wanna hear about?" And then I go into Google, and also increasingly using AI to help me find people, which is actually really useful, and to say, "Well, who can talk to this the most effectively?" So finding my guests, and then getting a hold of them and reaching out to them. And the same applies. So again, when I talk podcasting, there's sort of two separate worlds. There's the non-clinical podcast, and then there's the clinical, which is very much niche. I have a knowledge of the subject, and I have many questions, and then I find the specialist for the topic I want to talk to. So it'll be a specialist surgeon who's really good at orthopedic surgery, or I'll have a medicine specialist who focuses on endocrine diseases. And that's that's easy enough. But then same thing, I have to sit down and go, okay, well, what over the past 20 years of my career, what are the most common questions and challenges that I've come up with, or that I've had colleagues struggle with, or that I see people always ask, and to write down my question list to try and focus the interview to get to the key bits, to the golden moments. So it goes both ways, but they're very different, two different parts of my brain who do the two different podcasts, really.
And how long do you think you spend planning for it?
Um, the non-clinical ones probably much longer, but planning will often be it'll probably involve not probably, it always involves a little bit of research on the topic. I'm trying to think of so I'll give you an example. So right now I'm planning an episode on perfectionism. Big problem in our profession. Bunch of high achieving people who get into our degree and then they do a job that's really, really tricky to do and does not always deliver the outcomes that you want. So I'm trying to plan it. So it's I spent about 2 hours yesterday looking for potential guests. Now, literally today, literally on the way back to my office from the shops, I was listening to podcasts on perfectionism. So I identified a couple of guests and then I go, where have they spoken about this? Start with podcast, listen to a couple of podcasts with those guests, get some ideas together and uh, reading, Googling, finding out. So I try to build my own knowledge on the topic so that I can find the questions and the holes that I'd love to address. So hours would be actually if I but the nice thing is look it's and I think that's why it's so important for me to talk about things that interest me because if you told me to do a podcast on a topic that really doesn't interest me, I couldn't do it well. And it happens. Sometimes it does. Occasionally I'll have a sponsor that will say, "Can we talk about topic X?" I'm like, "Oh, boys, the hell out of me. I really don't want to talk about that." How somebody contacted me the other day and said, "Can we talk about health and safety stuff?" I'm like, "Ugh, it's an important topic, but it's not for me because I cannot spend more than half an hour reading up about that." For the clinical, it can actually be much faster, only because I have 25 years of questions built up inside me, so I can sit down. I'll spend half an hour to an hour jotting down my key questions going into a clinical episode. But again, the preparatory work has been decades, not that's why I can do it quickly.
Well, I think it's interesting because when somebody, and myself included, when you start a podcast, you think it's just going to be quick, fun, and easy, right? And I mean, I've done the math. It's at least 8 to 10 hours to make one episode.
Correct.
And I don't even think I included planning in that as well because I generally don't. I'm famously to say this a lot that I don't really plan that much, which I know is terrible, but I like it when I do my show, a Vietnam podcast. You know, I sent you the form, so that's part of my planning. I send all my guests like an introductory form, which really helps me get the answers quicker of what I need to do. And then I like having that free flowing conversation as well sometimes. So, but yeah, 8 to 10 hours to make one episode.
Easy. I generally in my head I work on not for the clinical so much. They faster. They're shorter format. Fewer bells and whistles, but 10 hours for a full episode for sure. And I will add, with all of this planning, what you said about the free flow, there's that component as well. I will sometimes specifically leave out researching certain sections of it because I want to genuinely. What happens if I'm over prepared? Let's say I'm doing a p- podcast on diabetes. If I now go and review all my diabetes notes and I go in there smart as, then sometimes I miss out on some of the important questions because I it's almost like my brain goes, "Yeah, everybody knows that." Whereas if I go and they're genuinely ignorant of some of the topics, it definitely gets me to and I'll often have speakers be quite surprised by my lack of knowledge. They're like, "Aren't you a qualified vet?" I'm like, "Yes, I am, but I did that 20 years ago at vet school. I've long since forgotten that." So it does it to some extent, I think, leaving some space for genuine ignorance. That's why I put it in my bio is that I ask the dumb questions that all the other vets have as well, because we do, and I pretending that I know that shit beforehand doesn't always help. So there's definitely room for that.
I think the word I liked what you said there was curiosity. And that's a lot when I go into it, especially with a Vietnam podcast. Like this episode, we knew in the beginning, we've just said we're going to talk about planning. You know, we have an idea of where this is going to go. Whereas with a Vietnam podcast, I like to just go in and go, I'm going to learn something new about this person, and I don't know what it is. So there's definitely something to be said about that as well. And in terms of the time, this is also why we work together and we help edit your podcast, because you just have to be like, sometimes I just need to pass this stuff off to somebody else and I'll focus on the planning and the hosting, you know?
For sure. And now planning is getting I can't say that this works because I haven't really tried it out yet, but I'm constantly learning about podcasting myself, listening to other producers and podcasters. I'm in a mastermind thing, and whereas the podcasts up until now, the non-clinical ones, were fairly, it's the word that Tim Ferriss used, a wide-ranging conversation on blah blah blah. I'm hearing more and more wide-ranging can mean long and meandering and not necessarily appealing to a lot of audience. So go in there with what's your audience going to get from this episode? Why should I spend the next hour listening to you yabbering on about shit? And delivering on that and delivering it on that concisely and specifically. So I am trying to plan a little bit better on saying, well, what is that question? If I'm going into it, I have guest X and they're amazing at something. And yes, we can towards there later in the episode meander and explore and discover and be surprised by where we end up going. But make sure that I have one thing that I want to talk about. And if we're going to talk about perfectionism, let's talk about perfectionism. Make sure that if my title says perfectionism, don't spend half an hour talking about your journey and how you came to do this. Get shit done, right?
So no, I mean, I'm just nodding and smiling here because I 110% love this. And I find often with this podcast, it's quite like meta because we talk about the things that I'm actually doing on this podcast. But I think that then proves that it's a great example. So we've decided before the episode, this is what we're going to be talking about. And in the beginning of this episode, so again, it's a bit meta. If you're listening, think about what I did in the introduction. This was all by design, that I'm sharing with the listener what they're going to learn about in this episode. And this is something I coach people on, something we talk about is what value is the listener going to get from this? And then you should deliver on that. And so I said right at the beginning, well, first of all, I position myself, who I am. You, as you said, you like my story right away. I'm like, I've been doing podcasts, so you know who I am. Because the worst thing is if so I actually do host a podcast in an industry that I have no connection to at all. And I'm a hired host, and it's a very simple hosting gig. I just have to ask a couple of questions. But it's like you mentioned, it's kind of difficult. It's different because it's not my area of passion. So, but anyway, I give myself as the guide, then I introduce you as the expert and why you're the person to then help deliver this value. And then what is this episode going to be about? So I 100% agree with what you're saying, or what Tim Ferriss says as well, that we want to then deliver on that value. And it makes it simple. And that meandering thing, I've really gotten better, I think, especially on smarter podcasting, of not doing that. Because for me personally, when I listen to a podcast and that the amount of times you see the title, right? And you're like, oh, I want to learn about strategic planning. And then you press play, and then they start talking about, their journey and talking about something totally different. And you're like, when are they going to get to the bit about the strategic planning? Like, I press play because I want to talk about that. So let's get back to strategic planning. One of the things I want to ask you is, what tools do you use? Because you talked about using AI. And so do you have a process or a system, and what tools do you use to help you plan?
Planning, Neil, I wouldn't say massively. The AI is a new thing. I find just straightforward ChatGPT. I've started using Perplexity as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Perplexity. It's a new AI free access app and software that pulls from different large language models. So not just ChatGPT, but including Claude and a bunch of others. And what I like about it is it gives you references for everything it tells you. So specifically when I'm looking at veterinary stuff or stuff that I need to make sure that it's not hallucinating, I can then click on whatever it'll say, blah, blah, blah. Here's your answer. Here's a link. And I can go double check the link. So that's useful. That's probably the main thing. I'll give you the example yesterday with ChatGPT planning the perfectionism episode. I started by saying I'm planning a podcast on perfectionism for veterinarians, who are the top 10 leading experts in the world who speak about perfectionism. And then it hits me with, Brene Brown, blah, 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 and a long list. And then I can choose how ambitious I want to be with reaching out to those. But then I can go further because I've got a niche. I did ask it. I say, okay, what about any uh, veterinarians who've had successful talks or spoken on platforms on this topic because I want to narrow it down. It fits more with my, and it did. It said, well, it's not that many, but here's four who've spoken about it. That was super useful. Googling that would have taken me hours and hours and hours, and it gave me a very succinct little list. So that's probably the main change that I have had with planning. I do find planning episodes is becoming easier and easier the longer I do it because of reputation to some extent. It's a small niche profession that I'm in. I'm not trying to talk about of to the whole world. I'm trying to talk to a very niche little audience, and it means the experts within my niche are also quite limited. So I get more and more recommendations. My planning becomes a lot more deciding what I want to say yes or no to. People will reach out and say, "Hey, I'd love to talk about this," or "You should talk to this person." So that helps a lot. But no, I beyond that, my systems are fairly simple in terms of planning. I work on my notes app. I'll create a note on my notes app. I'm an Apple man, and with topic perfectionism, and then I list my potential guests, and I'll jot down, and that file stays open. So when I'm out running or doing something else, and I have an idea, mull things over. That's why when you talk about how much time it takes planning, we also discount the mulling over of stuff in your head. Like, a lot of mental energy goes into these, and then I'll jot questions down on the go. That's really the main thing. Every time I, screenshots, or that's my process.
Yeah, you gotta take into account that time when you go to bed at night and you go to sleep, and then your head is just, like, thinking about things, and you're like, "I can't sleep now because I'm thinking about this." But what's the next step from that before the episode? So you've done the planning, you've done the research. So then how do you collate all that information together? And is it as simple as Google Docs or Microsoft Word, or are you re-putting it through ChatGPT? Because one of the things what you said there is really interesting, asking for recommendations for people. Chat GPT really does know a lot. It's weird. We did it with myself a few months ago. Like, I typed in, "What do you know about Neil Mackay?" And it spit out 100% accurate. But I was like, I think I was with my wife, and I was like, "No, no, no." But it knows all that because I use Chat GPT all the time. And then so she went on her Chat GPT, her account, which she's never used, put my name in or anything about podcasting. And she said something like, "Who's Neil Mackay?" And it literally like knew exactly who I was.
I'm
I
gonna
was
have
like,
to do that.
"What?"
I might have
Do that right now. Go
to.
on, do it. Let's do it right now. What does it say? Go on, let's
Let's
see.
let's try perplexity because
Let's
I
try it.
feel like the same because ChatGPT knows me very well.
Yeah. And what I was gonna add while you do that was yesterday I had to send off a proposal, and I was researching I was planning a research for proposals, not for podcasts, but I had to send off this proposal, and, I won't say the company's name or anything, but I was like, "What do you know about X company name?" And it's quite a small company. Boom, spat out a whole analysis of this company, and then the person I was talking to, I said, "What do you know about this person?" Boom, spat out all this information about this person. I was like, "This is absolutely mental." And again, it saves you all the time of Googling it, going through all the web pages, and then it helped me prepare for the not the interview, prepare for the presentation. But then go on, what did it say? Hugh Hiemstra?
It's pretty accurate. Hubert Dimstra. There's one thing that's still in an old bio. It's tells me that I'm a practice owner in Perth, Western Australia. That was true, no longer true. Wow. This goal is to transform the net. Wow, it's actually really spot on. I won't bore you with it all. It even tells me about his philosophy. Philosophy Ibrahim emphasizes the importance of community and conversation in veterinary practice, often sharing candid discussions that resonate with many in the field. Shit, yes. Wow.
Your your face, right? It's trippy, right? You're like, "Oh my god." But I think we've just struck on something here, and this is a good advice for planning your podcast. What you just read there is basically a podcast introduction. And I don't do that. I write my own introductions because I send you out a preparation form saying what do you want to talk about? Give me some of your successes. And part of that introduction I do is I just choose 3 bullet points. The other thing that I don't like is when and I have had podcasts where they literally spend 5 minutes. I remember one time I had a podcast and they spent 5 minutes reading out the guests, basically lifetime resume, CV, everything they'd done. And I was like,
which I used to do, and I can tell you my motivation for doing that. It was out of respect for my guest. Because if there are two reasons, it was respect for the guest, and then I felt that I had to build that their credibility to say, well, you should listen to them because they've written all these books and done all these speeches about it, blah 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 blah. Blah. And I'm learning more and more. No, I as a listener, I don't really care. I trust that you've done your research, and the guest that you're bringing me is going to bring value to me. I'll put a lot more of that in my show description, so you can go and look for it, but in the actual spoken thing. And I'm like you, I will get AI to help me with the bios and stuff, but I'm fussy about my writing, so I'll adjust it. I'll adapt it into my personal voice and to make it a bit more relaxed.
Yeah, I'm gonna try it in the next episode, and just before I even do anything, I'm just gonna say who the guest is, and then say, give me a 3 bullet point introduction for this guest, and we'll see how it goes. So see how that goes. So
So more planning. I think I'm less structured pre-production than you are, Neil. So, for example, bios and stuff I do afterwards. So I want to see where the conversation goes, and then I'll write my introduction, including the bio, to say we end up speaking about this and this and this because there's that little bit of flexibility.
which I do love that as well. I never get round to doing that again because it's more time, and you have to do the most you can with your time.
And it's
But if you
surprisingly time consuming to do it well. It is. You're right. Other planning is just guest preparation. I learned from your process. I Having that form to fill out is actually really useful. I don't. I will send mine's just email based mostly. So obviously booking a time and a place and talking through all the tech and the links and stuff. It's getting easier and easier. Like you, I use Descript, which is tied to was tied to Squadcast to record, but now today we just the recording straight into Descript, and that sends automated emails with all the stuff, which is great. I do have an assistant for the last year or two, which is super helpful. So she'll do the bookings and let them know all of the actual details about the when and the where and recording equipment and all that sort of stuff. But that's it. I'll obviously confirm times and all those sort of things. But I don't have a form, but maybe that's a good idea. A form to fill out to give me some detail. Again, I'll often do a bunch of this after the fact, but I like your process.
I think, I was gonna say I'm lazy, I'm not lazy, I'm busy, which is like you said, it's a terrible thing to say as well, but what I think I've developed over the years, I guess, is just being more efficient with my time and realizing what I can and I can't do, and so that form that I've sent you out, and if anyone wants to get a copy or see the form that I use, it's just a Google form, but it has all the basic, just like, what do you want to talk about? What do you not want to talk about as well? Which we use more. That's more pertinent for my podcast about Vietnam because there's more things that you can you can't talk about Vietnam. Asking for permission as well, so to use YouTube and the audio recordings. Just a simple question, but that for me was learning as well because I again would be forgetful, and so I remember one of the worst things I did was I had a minor celebrity on my podcast, and I hadn't told her it was video. And when she showed up, because we were doing it in person, she was like, "I didn't know it was video." And she obviously has a brand and an image to look after, so she didn't have makeup on, she didn't have her hair done. She's like, "I'm not ready to be on camera." And I was like, "Shit, yeah, that it was all on me." And so now that's a small thing to make sure that even for this conversations like this, that some people don't want to be on camera, and that's absolutely fine. But you need to know that before.
I'm trying to think as a guest on your. So my process, I have an email template that I have just saved on a document somewhere that I'll copy and paste and then modify for the specific guest. So it'll say blah blah blah. He record this, all the tech stuff, and then there's a little bit about our conversation that I'll write. That obviously has to be modified to say I'm thinking my main topics will be this. Here's a couple of example questions, and then I finish off with a couple of set questions. Like a lot of podcasts, I have a few finishing off questions, and so I'll put those on there. Um, and I maybe what I like about that is that it's not a dead set formulaic form that gets sent to every guest. I think maybe it makes them feel special. I don't know. I don't know because a lot of the benefit of having the podcast as well is relational. I'm building relationships with all these incredible people, so it's quite important for me to make that as personal as possible. So I don't know that I would necessarily go to a here's the form that you fill out. It feels more transactional, and it's not a criticism of you at all. I'm just trying to think of what I don't want to be too transactional. Here's okay, you've said yes, now do all of this admin. It's a I want to form a relationship with you as much as I can before we jump on air.
No, no, that's good. Hey, I think there's no wrong or right way, right? So, in terms of strategic planning long term, do you look at a season ahead and go, "These are the topics I want to cover," or I'll let you answer that. You got a wry smile on your face.
I laugh because No, not yet, but yes, going ahead. So far, it's been very much what comes across my plate. Look, there's a lot of stuff to talk about in my. As I said, I've got a lot of incoming suggestions and ideas, and the bottleneck is me and my time, exactly as you said, because there's only so much I can say yes to. So far, it's just been all right. I've got a smorgasbord of options. I do a lot of live recordings at conferences these days, so that's got to get edited and get out there. So no, I have not. And yesterday, literally yesterday, I sat down for 3 hours and sat because I've been feeling a little bit frustrated with the podcast. Oh, not frustrated, but I want to be a bit more strategic. So I had a whole morning, I set the morning aside, just said planning. I sent out a survey recently to my listeners to say, what do you like? What don't you like? And what do you want to hear more about? So I've got a long list of about 100 answers of here's what we want. And I went through that. I got GPT to group them for me into categories to say, well, can you take all these answers for me and put them into broad topic groups, which it did really effectively. And then I went through them and went, okay, what do I want to talk about? What excites me most to talk about, or what I think is what I feel from inside the profession are most pressing and most important to talk about. So I went, okay, my next 3 episodes that I'm planning is this, and this, and then I went through that process of saying who are potential guests for this. So yes, as of yesterday, I'm going to be more strategic.
But that is amazing. I mean, I absolutely love ChatGPT and AI. I think it's transformed our lives, obviously, for the better. I was just thinking about this yesterday when I was using it, and I was like, there's still so many people that don't use it. Like, being able to use it, you're already ahead of the curve because even when it first came out, so this was like, I remember 18 months ago, roughly, when ChatGPT just started coming out, maybe a little less than 18 months ago. And I was using it immediately. And then we were out for dinner with friends, and they hadn't even really heard of it, never mind use it. And one of them was a primary school teacher. She taught religious studies. And I said, right, tell you what, what's your next lesson on? What grade is it? What's the topic? And so I put it in. I said, how long is your class? 45 minutes. Give me a 45-minute lesson plan for grade 5 about Buddhism. I can't remember exactly, but something like that. Enter. And we just watched my phone as it just spat out in seconds the lesson plan. And she looked at it and she went, that's fucking amazing. You're like,
You guys are
yeah.
fucking amazing. She's a religious teacher.
She's not she's a religious teacher, not religious, or maybe she is, I'm not sure, but even since then, I just use it for everything really to help, but it still needs everything, it needs a human touch, right? Like, you take it,
For now.
it for now, yeah, we'll wait and see. I know it's coming, but I love that what things like what you can do, what you just said there. You get all these answers, and traditionally, what you'd go through it yourself, maybe categorize them yourself. Like, how long would that take you? And instead, you can just feed this information in. So that's another way that AI, that ChatGPT can help podcasting, help make your working more efficient. And also what I love about what you did there is listener engagement, and you got over 100 responses. That is absolutely incredible. So you're really connecting with your listeners as well. So to get them involved in your planning, I think that's the biggest valuable piece of information to take away from this episode is involve your listeners, because sometimes we're sitting by ourselves, right? And you're like, I don't know what to do. What do I want to talk about? Or you're racking your brain, and then you could just be like, I could just ask the people that listen, and they can do it for they can do it for me.
Quick little tip on that. Really interesting because it's the first time I've done that. Um, I have a newsletter as well, and it's probably mostly has legs because of the clinical continuing education content I put in there. So I sent this survey. I talked about the survey on the podcast, and it was a bit slack. I kind of forgot, so I only did it 3 or 4 episodes. But I also sent it out in the newsletter with a link, and 95% of responses came through the newsletter. I had crickets on the podcast. I think it's very important because I spoke on it and I thought I sold it really well on the podcast and said, and go to, and I gave a really easy link and I said, oh, the link is in the show description. Just click on it. Fuck all. Not fuck all, but one or two. Which is, it's not that but at least having that feedback from the newsletter. And these are people who listen because I did ask question one was, do you listen to the podcast or you just the newsletters? And most of them were listeners. And yeah, so it just shows you that it's podcasting for all of its strengths is not good to get clicks onto links.
So 100 million% agree. And that's so funny you brought that up. So I've just started recording. After we do this, I have to go finish recording an Ask Me Anything episode. And so I put out a shout on this is on a Vietnam podcast. I did an episode similar to you. I was like so passionate, so fun. I gave all these links. I was like, contact me by email. You can get me on social media, blah, blah, blah. I want to hear from you. Ask me anything and I'll answer these questions. Crickets, absolute crickets, zero. Got zero responses. But I'd also posted it all over social media with a graphic and questions. And I had to directly ask people. Like I had to reach out to a couple of people who were friends, but I knew listened to the podcast. I was like, hey, I need to get some questions for this episode. So I ended up with like 20 odd questions, and some of them are really great. But it is, I've found in my time, it's so strange because I look at obviously the download numbers. I've been doing it for years, over 70,000 downloads now. But then the engagement is so small, like getting people to contact you. But I think it's the nature of podcasting. They're in the car, they're running, they're in the gym. I've never really done it.
I've a handful of podcasts that I am a avid listener to, non-veterinary related. And if I think about it, I've almost never acted on anything that they've on any yeah, click on this, do this, or almost never, ever, ever. It's not because I don't care. I care deeply, so I go back and back. What I will sometimes do eventually when I want to do a course on marketing or whatever, then I'll go Google it. I'll say, "Oh, what is Seth Godin's course on marketing? Where can I find it?" Because I know he's talked about it, but I don't click from the episode.
Yeah, I think it's just a challenging thing. And I think it's something that podcasting is trying to address. I know I talked to Sam Sethi about podcasting 2.0, where they're trying to where all those comments, like if someone leaves a comment, it will all go to the one place. Because right now, like you can leave a comment on Spotify. Apple Podcast doesn't have that. Buzzsprout has a new thing called fan mail, and then obviously blah 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 blah. But one of the benefits, and we'll finish on this, of we're talking before we came on about using YouTube. One of the things I love about it is people use the comment section, and every day I go on my app and there'll be a new comment on one of the videos, and you can interact with them directly, and it's cool because you realize from their comment that they're commenting on something they saw in the video. So it's like I think people watch YouTube on a screen with a laptop or they're watching it on their phone, and it's just really easy to immediately leave a comment underneath the video as you're watching. So I've already found the engagement on YouTube to be, I mean, I'm making up the number, but 100, 1,000 times better than in podcasting. And I also think the YouTube ecosystem is more built towards commenting and interaction. And I found this out quite a while ago. The biggest social media platform in the world is YouTube.
Yeah, that's what I hear. That's why as I said, the reason we're talking about this off air, we talked about should I jump on the YouTube bandwagon? I have some resistance, but I think you've just convinced me as well. That's it's definitely worth trying. That's really interesting. One last thing on planning, something I learned, very, very valuable lesson, and that's came from the clinical podcast. But in terms of going after the guests that you want to get when you plan, don't underestimate who you can get. So what happened is I had initially when I started the clinical podcast, I would go for specialists who are not specifically well known, not the leaders in their field. Specialists. So, but my thought was like, who am I and who's my little podcast that the top in their field is going to want to give their time to talk to me on this topic. And it happened that one of my guests said something that wasn't 100% accurate, and the leader in their field from Australia contacted me and said, "Hi, I heard about that podcast, and that wasn't accurate." And so great. I loved the feedback. It was a little bit of negative feedback, but I learned from it. It's I could say constructive feedback. And then he said, when you do a podcast on a topic, you should speak to the best in the field. And I said to him, but I explained why I don't. I said, you guys are super important. You're super busy. I don't feel like I can. And he said, no, you got it the wrong way around. The leader in this field or her field, that is their life. All they want to do is talk about their thing. And if you can say to somebody, so he says, if he does a lecture, for example, on cardiology, if he has 200 people in a lecture hall, that's a lot. So if I can say to him, 500 to 1,000 people are going to listen to us talk about this thing that you care really deeply about, I'm all in. Just ask me. He says, yes, I'm busy, but I'll make time. So and that was such a and that's goes over to the non-clinical podcast as well. So again, back to my profession. I mean, my perfectionism thing. Yesterday, I found the list of the leading speakers on it, and I had Brad in my head, Dr. Brad, saying this, and I went, "Well, let me ask the biggest names." They will probably ignore me, but it's happened time and time again where I'm surprised, where the people I think no chance will go, "Yeah, sounds cool. Let's do it."
Love it. That's a great piece of advice to finish on. Well, Hubert, thank you so much for coming on Smarter Podcasting. These have been some really, really valuable tips about planning and preparation for your podcast to help it make it a success. Here at 7 Million Bikes Podcast, we love working with you. We love editing your podcast. It's so interesting. Being a dog owner myself as well, it's really good to speak to a vet and know that people out there that care for animals so much. Because I remember one of the first episodes I did with you, you called them patients, and I got confused at first because I was thinking like, "Are they not animals?" And I said it to my wife, and she was like, "Yeah, animals are patients too." And I was like, "Oh,
Yes,
yeah, I
the
just think of
human
the word."
the human is my client, but the animal is my patient.
Yeah, and I kind of was a bit confused 'cause I was like, "What is why?" But then I just thought that was so loving and so beautiful that the care that you talk about the animals and things like that. So that's absolutely incredible. So thank you for the podcast. Thank you for coming on Smarter Podcasting. If you like this episode, please follow, subscribe, turn on notifications, do all of that good stuff. Leave a review as well. That really helps. But the best thing that you can do if you're a podcaster and you want to help other people make great podcasts as well, and you think this is valuable, then please share this episode with them so they can learn from them as well and prove me and Hugh wrong. Get in touch, send a message, let me know how you are. What do you think of this episode? Anything like that at all. So we know that people are out there, but we know you're out there. So again, thank you very much. I've been Neil Mackay, the host of Smarter Podcasting, and thank you very much, Hubert Hiemstra. Cheers.
Thanks so much for having me, Neil, and thank you for your work and for helping my podcast be a better show.
You are very welcome. Cheers.